Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and my guest today is Siobhan Harris, who's been living sugar-free since 2018, but her journey was certainly not smooth. And in my chat with her today, which is actually part one of a two-part chat, Siobhan tells about her childhood with sugar and her relationship with sugar, and how the diet culture and the notion of moderation and even intuitive eating just doesn't apply to her. We'll get to our chat in just a minute. But first, I just wanted to tell you that if you're looking for some free resources about how to get rid of cravings, then I have plenty for you. First, download my 5 tips to get rid of cravings. And those 5 tips may not be what you think they are. So go to aftersugarclub.com and download your 5 tips today. And come check out the Life After Sugar Facebook page and subscribe to the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, as well as my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar, which is where you'll get all kinds of inspiration so that you can see that it's perfectly possible to live a happy and active life, even if you don't eat sugar. You can also check out my TikTok account at Netta_Life After Sugar. All right, so today I'm talking with Siobhan, and who's out in Portland in Oregon. And Siobhan, can you tell us a little bit about how you grew up, what you used to eat in your family, and right from childhood, your relationship with sugar?
Yes. Well, first, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm very excited to share my story. And yes, it starts my sweet tooth. Well, that's what my family called it. I had quite the sweet tooth, or they teased me that I was a chocoholic, which, now is kind of like, yeah, I really was. But growing up, I grew up in I'm 44. So I kind of grew up in the 80s, and my mom was never restrictive with food. Like we always had some good home cooked meals. But then we did a lot of desserts at night. Like it wasn't like I didn't have access to junk food, like there was I would say a really good variety of foods, but I can remember from a really early age having a problem with eating in moderation. Like I can remember as early as 4 or 5 years old, sneaking downstairs before anyone else was up, and pulling a chair over to the kitchen counter, climbing on top, getting into the cookie jar and eating as many cookies as I could before anyone else woke up. And it wasn't like anyone told me I couldn't do that, but even as a 4 or 5 year old, I knew that I wasn't supposed to do that, And then I found I would eat for instance, at Halloween or Easter, any holiday that there was candy, I would eat mine and my brother's and my sister's too. Mm-hmm. And it was I couldn't rest until it was gone. I'd have friends that were in their rooms, they had Halloween candy left over from months before. And I couldn't even comprehend the idea of not eating it all until it was gone, So even my brother's birthday is on Halloween. And that used to be the best because we would go trick-or-treating and then we would have cake and ice cream as well. So it was the best celebration for me too. And yeah, so that continued. I mean, I just always had a sweet tooth, or was called like a chocoholic in my family. People would get me like gigantic candy bars and stuff for holidays, birthdays. Um, I remember these fundraisers where you'd have to sell like big size candy bars, and I would eat the whole box and then like have to come up with the money
Oh no.
to like pay the fundraiser back. Like I couldn't have that in my possession without eating it all.
Uh-huh.
And at some point, I would hide wrappers and that kind of thing. Like I think my mom told me later she found a lot of like candy wrappers and stuff in my room. And part of me is like, how did anyone like not realize that this was an issue? But that was just the time then, and I wasn't overweight at all. I was a very, very active kid. So I would say it was like probably around seventh or eighth grade when I started going through puberty that I kind of started gaining some weight. I would say, like going into high school, between like middle school and high school. And that was the first time that I went on like a diet. And I remember having another friend that really loved sweets, and she started making herself throw up after she ate. And
Oh,
I remember trying that once, and I was like, nope, no, that is not for me. But I did try like diet pills. I think my first diet, though, was just calorie restriction. This was also the fad of everything low fat or no fat, So they had like those Snackwell
yes.
stuff. They had like fat-free chips. So I would eat a lot of that kind of stuff. Or just really like, I remember I would try to eat just like a Nutri-Grain bar in a day or something. I would try to really limit. So of course, never dieting and still being very active because I played a lot of sports. I mean, I lost weight, right? But it was always that kind of started and perpetuated this diet binge cycle that then went on for decades.
And
So
did you feel that you needed to diet because you were overweight, or just because that's the thing that girls do?
I think it was because I was starting to feel like overweight and compare. It was like I finally was like, oh, like I'm a little chubbier than I was. I'm not fitting in the same size clothes. Like, so I think it was that's a good question. I do think it was just because I felt kind of uncomfortable in my own body, And a lot of my friends, like, it wasn't till later in high school that I had other friends that I kind of dieted with. So I kind of started that on my own. And then it was really towards the end of high school, I think, where I was more aware that a lot of girls were doing this, in different ways. So, yeah, so it started that I would be really good for a while, and then I would be really bad for a while, So it was kind of this cycle where I would diet for a few weeks, and then I would binge, and then I would diet, binge, kind of back and forth, back and forth. And I would say my weight kind of went up and down, but nothing like, too bad. Cause again, I was really like exercising a lot, and that kind of went into college too, into university. I played Division I field hockey. So I was working out a lot, but I also kind of struggled more with my weight in college, I would say, and started feeling like just really uncomfortable and unhappy in my body. And also kind of being aware that noticing for the first time in college that like I really, and my friends would liked sweets, but not to the point where they were like obsessed with them like I was, or they didn't have this compulsion to have to eat them like I did. Like again, I could not moderate at all. Like I couldn't just have a bite of a cookie. I'd have to eat the whole thing or the whole bag or whatever. I was very like all the time, if I went out to eat, it was all about what I was going to eat, what kind of like dessert I was going to get. It was really for me like, like more like chocolate and dessert type things. And I loved like bread and butter too. So again, I had these really bad habits and was very uncomfortable in my body and just kind of like, what's wrong with me? Because again, I felt like, and I hear this from other women too, I felt like I had control in all these other areas. I was really disciplined. I was a good student. I was a good athlete, still making good grades doing both. But like the food part, I just couldn't get a handle on. And again, my weight was kind of fluctuating up and down.
Yeah, it's often the case I've seen where we're totally on top of things in all other aspects of our lives. And and I remember, hearing a very well-known person in this field, I won't mention any names, saying, I've got a PhD and everything, but I cannot moderate sugar. It's like the one aspect of my life where I just fall down. Is that how you felt?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I thought, I had like and I started kind of doing some research. Was I a binge eater? I knew I liked to binge, but I didn't like to purge, and I didn't like really over exercise or so coming out of college then, and starting to work and be more, in an office job where I wasn't as active, I did start piling on, more and more weight and was just more and more unhappy. And I would eat to soothe myself, right? I would eat if I was having a hard day. I would eat if I was having a good day. It was a lot of times, I think, at the end of the day, it's what I looked forward to. And it was something that I kind of knew again was different than other people. So, with boyfriends or friends, I would kind of hide what I was eating at times. But then I also started kind of sharing with people too, like, hey, do you ever feel like, you can't stop eating? And again, no one in my immediate circle had the same issue. I remember a friend just being like, well, just stop eating it then, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, that's so much easier said than done. I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine who just doesn't get or didn't get the can't stop eating with the sugary foods. But I knew that she had the same issue with wine, you know.
Mm,
But it's so funny because I could see that she had the exact same issue with wine, but she couldn't see it until, I brought it up for her, and said, well, when you have a glass of wine, do you just have one glass? She says, oh, no, I can't stop until the bottle is empty. And both of us were like, oh, wait. Oh,
And it's so much easier. And I use that a lot as I educate people now. I use that example when people don't understand. And still, once in a while, I'll get from family members like, why don't you just have like one bite so you can still try it? And I'm like, if I could, I would. And what I have found now is that for me, abstaining completely is so much easier than moderation ever was,
yeah.
like and I tried everything again. So this kind of goes through my 20s and 30s of just this up and down, trying every diet known to man. Like I used to love the new year because I'd be like, okay, this is the year. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to find what works. And I've tried every diet, every workout regime, everything. Like you name it, I've tried it. Every cleanse, every whatever, detox. I remember doing the Whole30 and trying paleo because I was doing CrossFit and I felt like crap. Like so many people that did that at my gym felt amazing after 30 days. And I couldn't even last the 30 days and like wanted to die. Like I felt so terrible. I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, like, I know sugar is not good for you, but I think my body needs it. Like maybe these other people can go without it, but like I must just really need it or something. So, and then I had a hard time. I was diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome. I got married and in my 30s, and it was really a change in what I was eating because I didn't want to go on drugs for the polycystic ovary syndrome. I knew that. So I started working with a naturopath. This is like early 30s. Started eating more whole foods, looking at things like organic, healthier, kinds of fruits and vegetables, getting a variety, So I was eating really well, but still having I'm still kind of doing both. And then it slowly changed, like where my binges got to be more like, well, I'm now doing at least things that I'm making homemade without chemicals, or, I'm eating like higher quality chocolate and snack food. But I still kind of struggled with being able to moderate it. So it's kind of in this balance. And I'll just kind of fast forward. I was able, I had some difficulties, some miscarriages. I have 2 kids who are now 8 and 10. And when they were really little, I breastfed both of them. And, some people, when they breastfeed, lose like a lot of weight. I just gained so much weight and had such a sweet tooth during that time. I really feel now what I know. I'm just like, I wish I could have done pregnancy and stuff better than I did, because I was still eating, sugar.
I want to take a quick break to say that if this is your first time here, then welcome and thank you for listening to this podcast. And whether you're new or a regular and you haven't yet rated or reviewed this podcast, could I ask you to scroll down and tap on the stars to rate this podcast, and also to write a short review to let me know how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. I love reading your reviews. And when you rate and review this podcast, not only does it encourage me to continue making new episodes, but it also helps to share this podcast and have more people see it, so that we can help more people feel better and lose weight with less sugar. So again, thank you for rating and reviewing this podcast and for spreading the word about sugar.
So after having my daughter, I was probably at my highest weight. I don't believe in weighing myself, and I haven't since like my daughter was born, but I could just tell by the way clothes were fitting, pictures, all the above. So I really then like doubled down. I was just so distraught about this. This is the other thing. It took up so much of my time thinking about what I was going to eat, what I wasn't going to eat. I mean, seriously, like 90% of my day was probably caught up in this minutia, right? And I'm still working. I have a family, I have all these other things. And all my mind can focus on is what I'm eating. And then if I, eat something, like if today, it was always Monday, I was going to start this diet. Mm-hmm. And I'd get, halfway through the day and then start just eating stuff. And then, the whole shame cycle that follows that, like you ruined everything. And I've been that person that has dug things out of the trash can, right? Like if I like threw the cupcakes out from the night before, because I'm going to start fresh, I have been the person that takes them out of the trash can and eats them the next day. I also like to tell this story. I'm actually divorced now, but my ex-husband really likes sweets too. And I remember when we first started dating, this kind of really clicked in place with me. Like we had first started dating, and I remember we had this like argument about who liked sweets more. And so we made like fresh made chocolate chip cookies, and we had just had lunch and we made cookies. And I remember they came out of the oven and I'm like shoving them into my mouth as fast as I can. And he's not eating any. And I'm like, well, aren't you going to have like a cookie? And he said, oh, I will, but not right now. I'm not hungry.
What?
And I was like, what does hunger have to do with it? So I'm like shoving these cookies in my mouth. Yeah. But that was a real pivotal moment for me. And again, he kind of started seeing this behavior where we'd make these cookies. He'd put some in the freezer thinking we'd have them later. Oh no, I ate those out of the freezer within like a day or two. We couldn't keep that stuff in the house because again, that compulsion of having to eat, that's all I could think about. I have many other important things going on, but I was like, there are cookies in the freezer. I must eat them. It overrode everything else. This compulsion until like I couldn't rest until they were done. Was I
It's
hungry? No.
exhausting. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
absolutely exhausting.
exhausting. And I wasn't hungry. I felt terrible. I'd have like food hangovers, like the next day where I would just feel like just so sick to my stomach because I had just overdone it so much. And I tried again every diet. Like I was vegan for a while. I was paleo. I mean, everything imaginable, trying to help myself, where I think my family was like kind of rolling their eyes, like, what is she doing now? And so then I enrolled in the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, IIN. It's a health coaching program, trying to help myself. And it was a great experience. I learned so many different things, but they don't address, and that might have changed now. They address emotional eating, but not sugar as an addiction, right? So then I was convinced. I started working with someone thinking I had binge eating disorder, so I've spent so much money on counseling too, on all these other modalities. Like I've been hypnotized, I can't even tell. I don't even want to try to summarize how much money I've spent on this whole thing. But then the last thing I really tried was intuitive eating, and there's this book about it. And it was basically like, there's no such thing as food addiction. Like if you restrict it, the problem is restricting anything. So if you, in your mind, make sure nothing is restricted, this will go away. And that's basically what the treatment is as well for people with eating disorders. So it works for eating disorders. But if you're a sugar addict, again, moderation isn't going to work.
But being told that all you need to do is eat intuitively and, not restrict, when this very approach is what's causing your problem, is toxic in my experience. And I've had intuitive eating coaches / nutritionists refuse to come on my podcast because they deeply disagree with, the whole notion of, hey, I cannot eat intuitively. This is what's getting me into trouble in the first place.
Yep, exactly. And see, my whole thing is like, everyone's so different. And this is what I really loved about the health coaching program. It's like, we're all individuals. So what works for me might not work for you because we're all so different. And I find that is true for your recovery too. But that's great. Again, if for some people, the intuitive eating, I wish that worked. I tried for 6 months. I white knuckled through that because I wanted to be an intuitive eater. Like I wanted that more than anything. I didn't want to give up sugar and flour. And by this point, I'd heard about sugar addiction. And if there was any research to say there was no such thing, that's what I was leaning into because I didn't want to give it up. And then finally, it kind of all came to it. Well, one of my lowest points, when you talk about like what's a real low point, was after I got my health coaching certificate. I was coaching people, helping people get off of sugar that weren't addicts, though, like kind of funny, but still struggling with it myself. And I went to New York City. They had a conference that we could attend. And I'm here with all of these health coaches, amazing energy. We all go to Whole Foods during lunch. But as I explain it, I was in one of my binge modes. And for that, I mean, like that switch was flipped on. And when that switch was flipped on, there was nothing I could do to turn that off, right? And I don't know why it would turn it on and off. It would be a day that I would wake up and it would be off. And I was like, okay, I can start a diet today. But until it was off, I was, again, just helpless against this compulsion. So here we are with all these, health coaches eating really healthy food. And I am like buying and sneaking like candies and other things in so that I can, and eating them in like the bathroom. As soon as I left the conference, because my husband at the time came with me and we'd go to shows and stuff at night, I would be gorging myself. I couldn't even get through a day, right, without having, so it really hit, like that was like kind of rock bottom for me. And I just felt so terrible about myself. Like, what kind of health coach am I? Can't even walk my own walk. So at that time, I read this article, and again, it was no new information, but I really believe we have to hear things over and over and over again sometimes for the pieces of the puzzle to finally come together. And it was this article, and it was a guy that was a recovering drug addict. I had him on my podcast actually early on because his article helped me so much. And in the article, he was saying that he became like a sugar addict and how giving up sugar was harder for him than getting off drugs, you know? And so that really clicked with me. And then he was saying in the article, you have to give up sugar and flour because the flour activates the same sensors in your brain to want you want more. And again, I hadn't heard that quite that way. So it just was like snapping into place for me. And then he also said, you know, you need to do it for a long time. And I think he said maybe 6 months. And in my mind, right away, my intuition was like, you need to do this for a full year. At this point, I'm 38 years old. I've been eating like this my whole life. And I just had this feeling like, you know, when I've tried to do the 30-day sugar detoxes, it didn't work. I needed more time than that. So I just kind of knew if I was really going to do this, I needed to give it a full year. So then became kind of my grieving process. That was like the fall of 2017. I had planned for January 1st, 2018, that I was going to go sugar and flour free. And then I started doing all of this research, and there was some information out there. But again, 2017 to fast forward to now, here we are in 2024. We were kind of talking about this before we hit record. So many more resources available, I think. So many more programs, coaching, podcasts even, you know, that are addressing this. I felt so alone because, again, no one in my inner circle struggled with this. I thought like I was the only person in the world that had this problem. And I read a couple like different books, but nothing that like took you through what it looks like to go off of sugar and flour. I researched like different, you know, 12-step programs. And again, that just wasn't going to work for me, but that works for so many people. So I don't want to discredit anything. I think the most important thing is to not give up and find what works for you, because that's the only way it's going to be sustainable. But if you try to be me or somebody else and do it the way we did, it's not going to work. And so you know, kind of did all this research, and again, nothing was really resonating with me. And the more when I was like, oh, I also am going to have to like weigh and measure. No way. It's hard enough giving up sugar and flour. I don't want to weigh and measure too. Again, interviewed many people on my podcast that really worked for them. But for me, I knew that would make me feel more restrictive and then be one of my triggers that made me want to eat more. So again, I kind of started this and decided, okay, I need to do it for a full year. And I'm going to write every single day for 365 days and write about it and what I'm feeling, and then turn it into a book so I can help other people. So that's really, I think, the piece. Now I tell people, if you can join a group, I think the accountability piece is so huge, and going through that like community of being with other people that speak the language, that understand when you say, oh yeah, I had to really stop myself from digging, you know, the old cupcakes out of the trash can and eating them. Like most people would be horrified, but your fellow addicts would be like, yep, been there, get it. I have to pour like water on it or salt on it or whatever. So I knew like, I knew it was going to be hard to do it on my own. I just couldn't find the community that I wanted. So I wanted to create my own. And so I went through this grieving process in the fall. I talk about how that's really important too. I remember the James Blunt song came on the radio. It's like, Goodbye, My Lover. And all I could think about, I'm bawling my eyes out, like having an emotional breakdown, thinking about sugar as my lover. And I had to kind of recognize how much it's helped me. It was a tool for me for so many years. Like it was, you know, I obviously was getting some benefit out of it being a way to like soothe myself. I just knew I needed to find new tools that were healthier and more loving. Again, I had 2 young kids. I didn't want them to see a mom that was like soothing herself with food or eating in secret. I just wanted to be the healthiest version of myself. And then the other big thing was wanting, being 38, knowing I was approaching kind of perimenopausal years, I wanted to be in the best shape and age as gracefully as possible too. So I kind of told myself, if this doesn't work, I'm going to give it a full year. If it doesn't work, then you can just binge your head off for the rest of your life. At least you tried.
Right.
And kind of fast forward to that, it was a good 5 months in before I started feeling better. So I like to share that for people too, because if I had given up after even 3 months, I wouldn't have seen the benefits. It took me a full 5 months where I finally started like losing weight. Those thoughts started subsiding. I wasn't obsessing about food anymore. The cravings were starting to go away. That mental chatter was kind of quieting. I was feeling more peaceful. And, so I would say by 8 or 9 months, I knew I wasn't going back. Like by then it clicked in, oh my gosh, again, giving it up completely is so much easier than moderating. Like so many addicts are all or nothing. And it's just easy. It's just like, if you're a moderator, great, that works for you. If you're not, again, just seeing how much easier it was for me just to say no and take it off the table.
Yeah, more
because
peaceful.
there were no inner conversations. There was no negotiation. Well, you can just have one, because my mind was like, nope. My mantra, which I say is really important, it was like this parenting mantra. When I was reading this parenting book at the same time, it was like, nope, we don't do that in our family. We just don't. So my adopted mantra for my, like, when it was like, oh, you could just have one. No, I don't do that anymore. I just don't. And that would just shut it down. So, of course, I still had the thoughts, the craving. Nope, I don't do that anymore. I just don't. And that kind of shut that all down.
That's very powerful, because many people, we'd love to believe that we're moderators. And it takes some of us, ask me how I know, a long, long time to accept that, hey, no, I'm an abstainer where sugar's concerned and flour as well. And, it's like trying to accept who you actually are. It can be quite a process,
Yeah. And no, it's so hard to think you're never going to like, then you're like, oh, I'm going to be the boring friend. What do you do at birthdays? What do you do? So I got through my year and was going to write this book. And then I found writing to be a lot harder than talking about it. So that's how my podcast was born, on my 1-year sugarversary, as I call it, which ended up being January 13th, by the way. The plan was January 1st, but as a true addict, I was like, no, I'll start tomorrow. And for whatever reason, the switch was, with me on January the 13th, 2018. And so a year later, I was like, I'm just going to do a podcast. And then I just started doing it weekly. So for me, that was a way to kind of, I read through my journal entries in there. So it was kind of a way of sharing my story and getting that accountability, but also meeting other people. And my hope was making sure other women struggling and men weren't feeling completely like alone, like they were the only ones. And also I felt like I was the most addicted person in the world. So if I could do it, I feel like anyone, could do it. So
that's very inspiring. Really, if someone wants to find your podcast, even though I think you're not making new episodes anymore, but
it's still out there.
It's still out there, isn't it? How can they find your podcast?
Yeah, so it's Unsweetened SIO is the podcast, and it's on, but I also have a website, unsweetensio.com, but the podcast is still on Spotify, Apple, all those places. My website would probably be the best place to go, and I have some resources on there, more information about me and the energy work that I do that helped me so much in my recovery. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'll put those links along with the podcast episode. Siobhan, thank you so much. Your story is so inspiring. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, amazing story. Siobhan really got to the heart of her sugar addiction as being what it is, recognizing that this is how your brain works, this is how you behave around sugar, is key, in my experience, and Siobhan's as well, to accepting the fact that you're an abstainer. And believe me, you're not alone. Accepting that about yourself is the key to actually getting the help that you need. And because Siobhan is so inspiring, and we only got to half her story, I'll be publishing part 2 of our conversation in just a few weeks. And you may be listening to Siobhan's story and wondering whether you yourself are a moderator or an abstainer, and more importantly, what you can do with this information in order to break free from the hold that sugar and sugar addiction has on you. And this is exactly why I created the Freedom from Cravings Formula program. It's a program that's specifically designed for women over 50 who want to get rid of cravings and feel more in control around food, especially sugar and comfort foods. In the program, you'll get step-by-step guidance and customized support through the 5-step formula that I've developed to help you get control over cravings so that you can finally live your life with more energy and fit into your favorite clothes effortlessly and feel confident in your food choices so that you can ditch the shame and embarrassment that you feel every time your emotions make you slip or fall off the wagon, and so that you never feel like you're on some kind of a restrictive diet. If you're at the stage of your life where you're finally ready to look after yourself, let's chat. You can hop on a free clarity call with me at any time by going to aftersugarclub.com and clicking on the big green button, Schedule a Clarity Call. We'll have a quick 30-minute one-on-one chat to see if the Freedom from Cravings Formula 90-day program is a good fit for you. So go to aftersugarclub.com. Speak soon. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.